Sometimes the most dangerous mistake isn't breaking the law, it's believing no one can hold you accountable. The flashing red and blue lights appeared in Danielle Carter's rearview mirror just as the last rays of a quiet autumn evening faded beyond the rolling hills outside Franklin County, Virginia. She eased her silver SUV onto the shoulder with practiced calm, placing both hands on the steering wheel before the vehicle had even come to a complete stop. The road was nearly empty, stretching for miles beneath a sky painted with fading gold and deep blue, while a cool breeze rustled the rows of maple trees lining the highway. Danielle had driven this route countless times after long days in Richmond, and nothing about tonight had seemed unusual until that moment. She had spent the afternoon reviewing legal documents for a community accountability initiative, and although exhaustion lingered behind her steady eyes, her mind remained clear. She took one slow breath, reminding herself of the advice her late father had repeated throughout her childhood. Stay calm. Stay respectful. Never let someone else decide who you are. Behind her, 2 patrol officers stepped out of their cruiser. Officer Ryan Mercer adjusted his duty belt before exchanging a quick glance with Officer Tyler Brooks. Neither hurried, yet neither smiled. Their expressions carried the quiet certainty of people convinced they already understood the story before hearing a single word. Danielle lowered her driver's side window halfway as Ryan approached. "Good evening, officer," she said with calm professionalism. Ryan barely acknowledged the greeting. His eye swept across the dashboard, the leather seats, the navigation screen, and finally returned to Danielle with an unreadable stare. "License and registration," he said flatly. Danielle nodded and reached slowly toward the glove compartment, carefully announcing every movement before making it. Years of experience had taught her that clarity often prevented misunderstandings. Ryan watched without blinking while Tyler circled the SUV, studying every angle as though searching for something invisible. A pickup truck passed in the opposite lane, its driver glancing toward the flashing lights before continuing into the distance. The highway fell quiet again. Ryan examined Danielle's license longer than necessary. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Richmond," Danielle answered. "Work." "What kind of work?" "Legal consulting." Ryan looked back at the vehicle once more, then at Danielle. "Long drive for legal consulting." Danielle offered a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. "It's about 90 miles. I make it often." Ryan's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Mind stepping out of the vehicle?" Danielle paused for only a second before answering. "Officer, may I ask why?" The question floated in the evening air, respectful yet confident. Tyler stopped beside the passenger door, folding his arms as if anticipating what would happen next. Ryan leaned slightly closer to the open window. "I'm asking the questions." Danielle kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply nodded once. Around them, another car slowed briefly as its driver noticed the scene. A phone appeared near the windshield before disappearing again as traffic continued forward. Neither officer seemed to notice. Neither realized that the quiet highway was no longer as empty as it appeared. And neither had the slightest idea that the woman sitting calmly behind the wheel had spent years preparing for moments exactly like this. Danielle slowly released the seat belt and stepped onto the gravel shoulder with measured movements, keeping her hands visible exactly where both officers could see them. The cool evening air carried the scent of damp leaves, and the distant sound of tires rolling across the highway blended with the soft chirping of crickets hidden beyond the tree line. She closed the driver door carefully without taking her eyes off Officer Ryan Mercer. Years of courtroom experience had taught her that every word mattered, but every movement mattered even more. Ryan took another slow look at her driver's license before folding his arms. "You said you work in legal consulting. Who do you consult for?" Danielle answered without hesitation. "Several organizations. Mostly public accountability and compliance." Ryan tilted his head slightly. "That sounds expensive." Danielle remained composed. "It can be." Tyler Brooks glanced through the windows of the sport utility vehicle, studying the neatly organized folders resting on the back seat. A closed laptop bag lay beside them along with a travel coffee mug and a folded navy jacket. Nothing appeared unusual, yet his attention lingered on the stack of documents as though he expected them to explain something that had never happened. Ryan stepped closer. "Do you have anything illegal inside the vehicle?" Danielle answered calmly. "No, sir." "Would you mind if we took a quick look?" Danielle met his eyes without changing her expression. "Officer, I respect your job. However, I do not consent to a search." The words were polite, measured, and completely free of hostility. Ryan's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Tyler exchanged another glance with him before speaking for the first time. "People with nothing to hide usually cooperate." Danielle nodded gently. Respectfully, exercising a constitutional right does not mean someone has something to hide. For a brief moment, silence settled over the roadside. The flashing emergency lights reflected across the polished surface of Danielle's vehicle, casting alternating shades of blue and red across the quiet pavement. Another sedan slowed as it approached the scene. The driver looked toward the traffic stop before continuing down the highway. Danielle noticed the passenger holding what appeared to be a cell phone near the window for several seconds. Ryan noticed it as well, though he quickly returned his attention to Danielle. "Please place your hands behind your back while we continue our investigation," he said in an increasingly firm voice. Danielle remained still. "Officer, am I being detained?" Ryan answered immediately. "I am giving lawful instructions." Danielle took one slow breath. "I am willing to cooperate. I simply want to understand the reason for the detention." Ryan did not answer the question directly. Instead, he spoke into the radio clipped to his shoulder, quietly requesting additional information while Tyler continued watching Danielle without saying a word. The seconds seemed to stretch endlessly beneath the fading daylight. Danielle's smartwatch vibrated almost silently against her wrist. She did not look down. She did not touch it. Hidden beneath the sleeve of her navy blazer, the device had already recognized an elevated stress pattern and activated a preset safety protocol she had configured months earlier. Without drawing attention, encrypted location data began transmitting to a secure contact list while the device quietly preserved a precise timeline of the encounter. Danielle never smiled, never appeared nervous, and never revealed that the first step of her response had already begun long before either officer realized that this ordinary traffic stop was quietly becoming something far more significant than anyone standing on that lonely stretch of Virginia highway could possibly imagine. Ryan Mercer lowered the radio from his shoulder and stared at Danielle Carter with the quiet confidence of someone who believed the conversation was already over. The fading sunlight disappeared completely behind the trees, leaving only the rhythmic flashes of the patrol car lights to illuminate the narrow stretch of highway. Danielle remained exactly where she had been instructed to stand, her posture relaxed, her breathing even, her expression composed. She knew that patience often revealed far more than confrontation ever could. Tyler Brooks walked another slow circle around the sport utility vehicle before stopping near the rear bumper. He crouched briefly, examining the license plate, then stood again without saying a word. The silence between the two officers seemed almost rehearsed, as though each understood the role the other was expected to play. Ryan finally broke the quiet. "You seem unusually calm." Danielle answered with the same measured tone she had maintained from the beginning. "Staying calm helps everyone make better decisions." Ryan gave a faint smile that never reached his eyes. "Most people get nervous during traffic stops." Danielle looked toward the highway where another pair of headlights approached in the distance before disappearing around a bend. "Every situation is different." Ryan studied her face carefully, searching for uncertainty, frustration, or fear, but found none. Instead, he noticed something else. Confidence. Not arrogance. Not defiance. Simply the confidence of someone who understood her rights and had no intention of surrendering them. That realization unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Tyler stepped closer holding a small flashlight, directing its beam toward the interior of the vehicle through the side windows. The neatly stacked folders remained untouched. A leather notebook rested beside them with a silver pen clipped carefully along its spine. Everything inside reflected order, discipline, and preparation. "She keeps everything organized," Tyler muttered quietly. Ryan nodded without looking away from Danielle. "Sometimes people prepare because they know they're going to be questioned." Danielle heard the remark but chose not to respond. She had learned long ago that silence often carried greater weight than unnecessary explanations. Her father had taught her another lesson that stayed with her throughout law school and every difficult case afterward. Truth does not become stronger because you repeat it. It becomes stronger because you remain steady while others question it. Those words echoed in her thoughts as the evening grew darker. A cool gust of wind swept across the roadside, lifting a few fallen leaves into the air before scattering them across the pavement. Somewhere beyond the trees an owl called into the quiet night. The peaceful surroundings stood in sharp contrast to the growing tension beside the highway. Ryan checked his watch. "Dispatch is taking longer than expected." Danielle answered politely. "I understand." Another brief vibration pulsed against her wrist beneath the sleeve of her blazer. The secure safety protocol had completed its second phase. Timestamps, location coordinates, and continuous audio preservation were now safely stored beyond the reach of anything happening on the roadside. Danielle never glanced at the device because she did not need confirmation. She trusted the system completely. Ryan stepped closer once more, reducing the distance between them. "Tell me something, Ms. Carter. Have you ever had problems with law enforcement before?" Danielle met his eyes without hesitation. "I have spent many years working with law enforcement agencies. I have also spent many years believing accountability makes good officers stronger." Ryan remained silent for several seconds. He believed he had asked a simple question. Instead, he had received an answer that somehow felt far more important than he yet understood, while somewhere miles away another notification quietly appeared on a secure screen, marking this lonely Virginia highway as the beginning of an investigation that was already moving in a direction neither officer could see. The quiet roadside no longer felt isolated. Every passing vehicle seemed to slow for a moment before disappearing into the darkness, each driver briefly catching sight of the flashing patrol lights before continuing toward home. Danielle Carter remained exactly where she had been standing, her hands relaxed at her sides, her attention fixed on Officer Ryan Mercer without a trace of anger or fear. She understood that moments like this often revealed more about the people asking the questions than the person answering them. Ryan broke the silence once again. "Ms. Carter, I am giving you another opportunity to cooperate fully." Danielle answered with steady respect. "Officer, I have cooperated from the beginning. I provided my identification, answered your questions, and followed every instruction that has been given." Ryan glanced toward Tyler Brooks before speaking again. "Then you will not mind waiting a little longer?" Danielle nodded. "I will remain here as long as the law requires." Her answer seemed to frustrate him precisely because it left no room for disagreement. There was no raised voice, no emotional reaction, no dramatic confrontation. Only calm certainty. Tyler walked back toward the patrol cruiser, speaking quietly into the radio while reviewing information displayed on the in-car computer. Several seconds passed before he looked back toward Ryan with a subtle shake of his head. Whatever they had expected to find had not appeared. Ryan looked once more at Danielle's driver's license before slipping it into his pocket instead of returning it. "Until we finish verifying everything, you will stay right here." Danielle noticed the deliberate choice but said nothing. She simply replied, "I understand that you are conducting your investigation. I would appreciate having my identification returned when the process is complete." Ryan ignored the request. Instead, his attention shifted toward the organized folders visible through the rear window of the sport utility vehicle. "Important paperwork?" he asked. "Client files," Danielle answered. "Confidential legal material." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Convenient answer." Danielle met his gaze. "It is the truthful one." Another vehicle slowed noticeably as it passed. This time the driver rolled down a window for several seconds before continuing down the highway. Tyler noticed it and quietly muttered, "People are paying attention." Ryan answered under his breath, "Let them watch." Neither officer realized that several recordings from different angles were already making their way across social media, showing only a calm woman standing beside her vehicle while two officers prolonged a routine stop without any visible urgency. Danielle remained completely unaware of who was recording because she never turned toward the passing traffic. Her focus stayed exactly where it belonged. She understood that discipline meant refusing to be distracted by circumstances beyond her control. The evening air grew colder, and a light breeze carried the scent of fresh rain drifting in from the west. Above them, dark clouds slowly covered the remaining stars. Danielle remembered another lesson from her father. Character is never measured on your easiest day. It is measured when someone else decides to test it. She quietly repeated those words in her mind while Ryan continued searching for an explanation that would justify the growing length of the stop. Every passing minute quietly shifted the balance. The officers believed time was increasing their authority. Danielle understood that time was preserving every decision, every statement, and every unanswered question with remarkable precision. Somewhere far beyond the empty highway, secure notifications continued reaching people trained to recognize unusual patterns, and with every minute that passed, what appeared to be an ordinary roadside encounter moved one step closer to becoming evidence that would soon be impossible for anyone to ignore. The minutes stretched quietly across the empty highway, yet Danielle Carter never allowed impatience to appear on her face. She stood beneath the alternating flashes of red and blue light with the same calm expression she had carried since the traffic stop began, knowing that composure could sometimes become the strongest statement a person could make. Officer Ryan Mercer walked a few steps away to speak privately with Tyler Brooks, their voices too low to hear clearly, but their repeated glances toward Danielle revealed that the discussion centered on her rather than any confirmed evidence. Tyler looked back toward the sport utility vehicle once again before saying something that caused Ryan to frown. Neither officer seemed satisfied with the information they had received from dispatch. Everything they had checked appeared ordinary. The vehicle was properly registered. The driver's license was valid. There were no outstanding warrants, no reports of criminal activity, and no obvious reason for the stop to continue beyond routine procedure. Yet Ryan remained unwilling to bring the encounter to a close. Danielle noticed none of this with satisfaction or frustration. She simply observed. Years spent inside courtrooms had taught her that unnecessary words often distracted from the facts quietly building beneath the surface. Another cool breeze swept across the roadside, carrying the distant scent of approaching rain. The leaves above rustled softly while the steady pulse of the emergency lights reflected across the polished hood of her vehicle. Her smartwatch rested unnoticed beneath the sleeve of her blazer. Without a single visible movement from Danielle, the device continued operating exactly as designed. Every passing minute updated secure location records. Every spoken exchange was preserved with precise time stamps. Every change in the encounter became part of an objective timeline stored far beyond the roadside. Months earlier, she had configured the system after advising community organizations on personal safety practices during public encounters. She had hoped she would never need it herself. Tonight it worked exactly as intended. Ryan returned carrying Danielle's driver's license but did not immediately hand it back. Instead, he held it loosely while studying her once again. "You seem very prepared," he said. Danielle answered honestly. "Preparation is part of my profession." Ryan nodded slowly. "Almost as if you expected something like this." Danielle looked toward the quiet highway before meeting his eyes again. "I hope every interaction ends respectfully." "That is what I expect." The answer lingered in the cool evening air. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, saying nothing. Several miles away, inside a secure operations office, a notification quietly appeared on a monitoring screen indicating that Danielle's safety protocol had remained active longer than normal. The software did not assume danger. It simply recognized unusual duration combined with location data and preserved everything for later review. No alarm sounded. No dramatic response was triggered. The system merely continued collecting facts without emotion, much like the law itself was meant to do. Back on the highway, another family vehicle passed slowly, and a child in the back seat briefly looked toward the flashing lights before the car disappeared into the darkness. Danielle wondered what that child believed was happening. Perhaps they assumed the officers already knew the truth. Perhaps they believed authority always carried certainty. She quietly hoped they would someday learn that real justice depended not on assumptions but on fairness. Ryan finally extended her driver's license toward her, then paused before releasing it. For just a second, he seemed uncertain whether the encounter had unfolded the way he originally expected. Danielle accepted the card with a simple thank you, offering neither relief nor resentment. She did not realize that while the roadside remained almost silent, the invisible record of this ordinary evening had already begun traveling toward people who understood exactly how much a single unanswered question could matter. Danielle Carter slipped her driver's license back into her wallet with the same quiet confidence that had defined every moment of the encounter, yet something told her the evening was far from over. Officer Ryan Mercer remained standing in front of her vehicle instead of returning to his patrol car, while Tyler Brooks continued watching the road as if waiting for something that had not yet arrived. The silence became heavier than any conversation. It was the kind of silence built from assumptions rather than facts. Danielle understood it well because she had spent years studying how ordinary moments could slowly evolve into cases that eventually reshaped public policy. Earlier that afternoon, before leaving Richmond, she had walked through the marble halls of a federal office building carrying the same leather notebook now resting inside her vehicle. A small conference room on the 7th floor had been filled with attorneys, compliance specialists, and experienced investigators reviewing patterns from dozens of documented traffic stops collected across multiple counties. The purpose of the meeting had never been to target individual officers. It had been to identify recurring procedures that deserved closer examination. Danielle had been invited because of her reputation for combining legal precision with practical solutions. Her role was simple: review facts, protect constitutional standards, recommend accountability where evidence supported it. Nothing more. Nothing less. Before leaving the meeting, one senior investigator had offered a reminder that stayed with her throughout the drive home. The strongest cases are never built on emotion. They are built on consistency. Danielle had quietly nodded because she believed those words completely. Now, standing beside the highway beneath flashing patrol lights, she realized how strangely familiar that advice suddenly felt. Every question Ryan had asked. Every unnecessary delay. Every decision to continue the stop despite the absence of new information. None of it depended on opinion anymore. Each moment had become another objective fact preserved within an uninterrupted timeline. Back in the present, Ryan looked toward the folders visible inside Danielle's sport utility vehicle once again. "You carry a lot of paperwork for someone driving home after dark," he remarked. Danielle answered calmly. "Some of those documents will be discussed in court next week. I prefer to keep them with me." Ryan studied her expression, perhaps expecting hesitation or uncertainty, but found only quiet professionalism. Tyler walked over holding a small notepad. "Dispatch confirmed everything again," he said softly. Ryan accepted the information without responding. His eyes remained fixed on Danielle, as though he believed there was still something hidden beneath her calm demeanor. In one sense, he was correct. There was something he had not discovered. It was not hidden inside the folders, the vehicle, or the notebook. It was hidden inside the purpose behind Danielle's work itself. She had devoted years to strengthening trust between communities and honorable officers by encouraging transparency instead of conflict. Accountability, in her view, was never about embarrassment. It was about protecting the integrity of those who wore the badge with honesty. The irony was impossible to ignore. On a day devoted to reviewing fairness, she had unexpectedly become part of the very type of encounter she had spent years helping others understand. High above the quiet highway, the first light drops of rain finally began touching the windshield of her parked vehicle, while somewhere beyond the darkness another government vehicle quietly changed direction after receiving updated information connected to a routine traffic stop that no longer appeared quite as routine as it first seemed. The rain settled into a gentle rhythm against the pavement as Officer Ryan Mercer took one final look at Danielle Carter before speaking. "I am going to ask you one more time. Is there anything you have not told us?" Danielle answered with the same calm voice that had never once wavered. "I have answered every question truthfully." Ryan held her gaze for several seconds, as though expecting uncertainty to appear if he simply waited long enough. It never did. Tyler Brooks shifted his weight uneasily beside the patrol cruiser. The prolonged stop had produced nothing that justified the growing tension, and even he could sense the balance beginning to change in ways neither officer fully understood. Then a pair of headlights appeared far down the highway. Unlike the passing traffic throughout the evening, these lights slowed steadily before turning onto the shoulder several hundred feet behind the patrol vehicle. A dark government-issued sport utility vehicle came to a controlled stop without activating emergency lights. Moments later, a second unmarked vehicle arrived and parked behind the first. Ryan frowned as two professionally dressed individuals stepped out wearing weatherproof jackets displaying official identification clipped near their collars. They walked calmly toward the scene without urgency, their expressions composed and businesslike. Danielle recognized neither face, but she immediately understood why they had arrived. One of the officials addressed Ryan first. "Good evening, Officer Mercer. We are with the Office of Professional Standards. We received an automated notification associated with this location and would like to understand the status of this traffic stop." Ryan appeared surprised. "This is an active investigation." The official nodded respectfully. "Of course. We are simply requesting the timeline and current basis for the continued detention." Danielle remained silent. She had not called anyone. She had not made a dramatic announcement. She had not revealed anything about her work. The technology she trusted had quietly done exactly what it had been designed to do by preserving facts and notifying the appropriate channels when predefined conditions were met. Tyler looked from the arriving officials to Danielle and then back to Ryan. His expression slowly changed as the pieces began fitting together. Ryan turned toward Danielle. "Who exactly are you?" Danielle answered without pride or satisfaction. "My name is Danielle Carter. I am an attorney who advises public accountability initiatives and constitutional compliance programs. I believe every encounter deserves fairness, including this one." The words landed with remarkable simplicity. There was no hidden title intended to intimidate anyone and no dramatic declaration of authority. Only the truth, spoken as calmly as every answer she had given throughout the evening. One of the officials politely requested the incident number before asking whether body camera footage and dispatch records had been preserved. Ryan quietly confirmed that they had. The official thanked him and wrote several notes before explaining that standard documentation procedures would follow because the automated safety notification had created an independent record requiring review. Danielle listened without interrupting. She understood that accountability was never about proving someone wrong. It was about allowing facts to speak louder than assumptions. As the steady rain continued falling across the quiet Virginia highway, Ryan slowly looked around the scene that only minutes earlier had seemed completely under his control. Nothing had changed through force. Nothing had changed through anger. Everything had changed because the truth had patiently waited for the right moment to introduce itself. The steady rain softened the glow of the patrol lights, turning the quiet stretch of highway into a scene defined not by urgency but by reflection. Officer Ryan Mercer stood silently while the representatives from the Office of Professional Standards documented the timeline with calm efficiency. No voices were raised. No accusations were made. Every question focused on facts, times, procedures, and recorded information. Danielle Carter remained beside her vehicle, allowing the process to unfold without interruption. She understood that the strongest form of accountability was one that never needed dramatic words. One of the officials politely requested access to the dispatch log, confirming the initial reason for the traffic stop, the duration of the encounter, and every communication transmitted through the patrol radio. Another official verified that the body camera recordings would be preserved according to departmental policy. The requests were routine, yet Ryan slowly realized that routine procedures often carried the greatest consequences when followed carefully. Tyler Brooks quietly watched as each detail was written into an official report. He replayed the evening in his mind, remembering every question, every unnecessary delay, and every opportunity to conclude the stop much earlier. For the first time since the encounter had begun, he seemed less concerned about defending past decisions than understanding how they had reached this point. Danielle noticed the change but chose not to comment. She believed that genuine reflection could never be forced. It had to arrive on its own. Over the following days, the preserved recordings were reviewed alongside dispatch records, dashboard camera footage, time-stamped digital logs, and statements from witnesses who had driven past the scene. Each source told the same quiet story from a different angle. Independently, none of them appeared extraordinary. Together, they created a complete and consistent timeline that required no speculation. Procedures were examined. Questions were evaluated. Decisions were measured against established policy. The review expanded beyond a single evening, not because anyone searched for wrongdoing, but because consistency required context. Additional traffic stop records from previous months were compared using objective standards already established within departmental oversight programs. Supervisors examined training documentation, field reports, and available video evidence to determine whether improvements could strengthen future interactions with the public. Throughout the process, Danielle never gave interviews or sought public attention. She continued her work exactly as she always had, believing that trust in the justice system depended on institutions responding to facts rather than personalities. When colleagues asked about the evening, she simply answered that every encounter deserved to be reviewed fairly, regardless of who stood on either side of the conversation. Weeks later, the department announced that the findings had resulted in additional training, procedural revisions, and administrative actions handled according to internal policy. Officials emphasized that accountability existed not to weaken law enforcement but to strengthen public confidence by ensuring professional standards remained consistent for everyone. The announcement received little national attention, yet within the community it carried lasting significance because people recognized that transparency had prevailed without hostility. On a quiet afternoon, Danielle drove the same highway once again. The trees looked exactly as they had before, the rolling hills stretched peacefully beneath the Virginia sky, and traffic moved with ordinary rhythm. Nothing about the road had changed. What had changed was the understanding that even an ordinary evening could remind an entire community that fairness was never protected by assumptions. It was protected by patience, truth, careful documentation, and the willingness to let integrity speak long after the flashing lights had disappeared into the distance. Several months passed before Danielle Carter found herself driving along that same Virginia highway again, this time beneath a bright spring sky instead of a cold autumn evening. The road looked unchanged, with the same gentle curves, the same rows of maple trees, and the same quiet fields stretching beyond the pavement. Yet for Danielle, the place carried a different meaning. It had become a reminder that history is often shaped not by dramatic moments but by ordinary decisions made when no one believes they are being watched. The review that followed the traffic stop quietly reached its conclusion. Department leaders introduced additional constitutional policing workshops, expanded communication training, and strengthened documentation procedures for extended traffic stops. Supervisors reminded every officer that professionalism was measured not only by enforcing the law but also by protecting the rights that the law existed to defend. None of those changes erased the past, but they demonstrated something equally important. Institutions could improve when people chose transparency over pride. Danielle never celebrated the outcome because she had never wanted anyone to fail. Her goal had always been the same as the one she carried into every courtroom and every community meeting. She wanted trust to become stronger than suspicion. She wanted fairness to become more predictable than fear. She wanted every honest officer to know that accountability protected their reputation just as much as it protected the public. One afternoon she received a handwritten letter from a young law student who had followed the public reports surrounding the policy changes. The student wrote that seeing someone remain calm under pressure had inspired a deeper belief in both the Constitution and the legal profession. Danielle smiled quietly before placing the letter inside the same leather notebook she had carried on the night everything changed. She thought again about her father's words. Character is what remains after the moment has passed. Only then did she fully understand what he meant. Character was not proven by winning an argument. It was revealed by refusing to abandon dignity when others expected anger. Across town, Officer Tyler Brooks attended one of the department's new professional development sessions. During a discussion about public trust, he admitted that one encounter had permanently changed the way he approached every conversation during a traffic stop. He did not speak about blame. He spoke about listening before assuming and documenting before concluding. Quiet lessons often lasted longer than loud speeches. Ryan Mercer also continued his own professional journey through the department's established review process. Like every public servant, he was ultimately responsible for his decisions, and those decisions became part of a larger conversation about leadership, judgment, and public confidence. The story was never about one officer or one driver. It was about the choices every person makes when given authority over someone else's ordinary day. As the sun settled beyond the horizon, Danielle continued driving toward home with both hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, just as they had on that unforgettable evening. The highway stretched peacefully before her, no longer carrying the weight of uncertainty but the quiet promise that truth never needs to shout in order to be heard. She looked ahead with calm confidence, knowing that justice is rarely the loudest voice in the room, yet it is almost always the one that remains after every other voice has faded away, because a badge may represent authority, but integrity is what gives authority its meaning.